located in the center of Africa. The capital city of Bangui, founded as a French trading post in 1889, sprawls on the banks of the Ubangi River. Famed in colonial times as one of the most agreeable cities in equatorial Africa, Bangui blends wooded hills and grassy meadows with heavily populated shanty towns, a handsome if now somewhat run-down city center, and modern residential districts. Though strikes and curfews often bring the city to a standstill, Bangui enjoys a vibrant nightlife and a diverse musical culture. The Central African Republic, CAR, is a perennially weak state that sits at the crossroads of ethnic and linguistic groups in the center of the African continent. Among the last areas of sub-Saharan Africa to be drawn into the world economy, its introduction into trade networks around the early 1700s fostered significant competition among its population. The local population sought to benefit from the lucrative Atlantic, Trans-Saharan, and Indian Ocean trade in enslaved people and ivory. Slave raids aided by the local populations fostered animosity between ethnic groups that remains today. The territory was established as a French colony named Ubangi-Shari in 1903, and France modeled its administration of the colony after the Belgian Congo, subcontracting control of the territory to private companies that collected rubber and ivory. Although France banned the domestic slave trade in CAR in the 1910s, the private companies continued to exploit the population through forced labor. The colony of Ubangi-Shari gained independence from France as the Central African Republic in 1960, but the death of independence leader Barthélemy Boganda 6 months prior led to an immediate struggle for power. CAR's political history has since been marred by a series of coups, the first of which brought Jean-Bédel Bokassa to power in 1966. Widespread corruption and intolerance for any political opposition characterized his regime. In an effort to prolong his mandate, Bokassa named himself emperor in 1976 and changed the country's name to the Central African Empire. His regime's economic mismanagement culminated in widespread student protests in 1979 that were violently suppressed by security forces. Bokassa fell out of favor with the international community and was overthrown in a French-backed coup in 1979. After Bokassa's departure, the country's name once again became the Central African Republic. CAR's fifth coup in 2013 unseated President François Bozizé after the Seleka, a mainly Muslim rebel coalition, seized the capital and forced Bozizé to flee the country. The Seleka's widespread abuses spurred the formation of mainly Christian self-defense groups that called themselves the Anti-Balaka, which have also committed human rights abuses against Muslim populations in retaliation. Since the rise of these groups, conflict in CAR has become increasingly ethno-religious, although focused on identity rather than religious ideology. Elections in 2016 installed independent candidate Faustin Archange Touadéra as president. He was re-elected in 2020. A peace agreement signed in 2019 between the government and the main armed factions has had little effect, and armed groups remain in control of large swaths of the country's territory. Touadéra's United Hearts movement has governed the country since 2016, and a new constitution approved by referendum on July 30, 2023 effectively ended term limits, creating the potential for Touadéra to extend his rule. The Central African Republic is roughly the size of France and is bordered by Chad to the north, Sudan and South Sudan to the north and east, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Kinshasa, and the Republic of the Congo, Brazzaville, to the south, and Cameroon to the west. The capital, Bangui, is situated on the southern boundary, formed by the Ubangi River, a tributary of the Congo River. Central Africans currently speak a wide variety of languages, including Baya, Gbaya, Bunda, Ngbeka, Sera, Mbum, Kare, and Manjia. French and Sango are the official languages. Sango is a lingua franca spoken by nearly 9/10 of the population. It was originally the language of a people from the Ubangi River region, but Christian missionaries adopted, simplified, and disseminated it in the 1940s and 50s to their followers throughout the country. Roughly 4/5 of the population professes Christianity. There is a sizable minority of unaffiliated Christians, while Roman Catholics, Protestants and independents constitute the rest. About 1/10 of the population continues to practice traditional religions. There is a growing number of Sunni Muslims. A small minority declares no religious affiliation. About 3/5 of the population is rural, residing primarily in the southern and western parts of the country. The eastern and northeastern sections of the country are less populated. Of the urban population, a significant proportion lives in Bangui. Other major towns are Berberati, Bossangoa, and Bwera in the west, Bomberi and Bria in the central plains, and Bangassou and Mabe on the Ubangi River. The Central African Republic is sparsely populated. The population growth rate is high but is offset by the country's low population density, net flow of immigrants, and high infant mortality rate. More than 2/5 of the population is under the age of 15, and life expectancy is less than 50 years because of poor health conditions and services and inadequate food distribution. Agriculture is the largest sector and the basis of the Central African economy, contributing half of the gross domestic product and occupying nearly 4/5 of the workforce. Diamonds and timber also contribute to the economy. International, mostly French, capital dominates the economy, but the Central African Republic has tried since independence to attract capital and development monies from other countries, including Libya, Taiwan, China, Germany, and Japan. Under pressure from the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, IMF, to reverse the growth of government spending, liberalize prices, encourage a more open investment code, and provide incentives to agriculture and forestry, the Central African Republic submitted to a structural adjustment program in 1986. In the 1990s the IMF asked for further adjustments, such as devaluing the CFA franc and privatizing various businesses, commercial banks and a petroleum distribution company. As France has reduced its financial commitments to its former colonies in Africa, the Central African Republic's financial standing has deteriorated. In the 1990s a decline in international prices for cash crops, the inflated cost of imports caused by poor transportation into the country, the continued smuggling of diamonds across the border, and domestic political unrest further strained the economy. Most significant, however, were corruption and financial mismanagement, which left the government unable to pay the salaries for the military and the public sector. The resulting political unrest continued into the 21st century. Most Central Africans rely on farming for their livelihoods. Men clear the fields, while cultivation is largely the responsibility of women, who grow cassava, manioc, corn, maize, millet, sorghum, rice, squashes, and peanuts, ground nuts, for their families' consumption. Cash crops such as cotton and coffee, introduced by French plantation owners, are produced largely on small land holdings. The country is mostly self-sufficient in basic foodstuffs, and agricultural diversification has been encouraged by the government. The growing of vegetables for export has also been supported by the government. Although Central Africans have for some time cultivated sugarcane and oil palms on a small scale, the country has lately undertaken efforts to grow both crops on large, mechanized plantations. The livestock population includes cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, and poultry, most of which are kept for domestic consumption. Pond-raised tilapia and river fish also contribute substantial amounts of protein to the diet. The tsetse fly reduces the area in which stock can be raised, but development programs to improve herds and herd migrations from Chad and Sudan continue to increase the number of domestic animals in the country. Tropical rainforest covers a significant part of the Central African Republic, mainly in the southwest, and timber exports are a vital source of foreign exchange. Heavy reliance on international commodities markets, however, has rendered the country's economy extremely vulnerable to price fluctuations. Situated on a fertile plateau and abundant in water resources, the Central African Republic has considerable agricultural potential. It also has a wealth of mineral resources, including diamonds, which account for nearly half of the country's total export earnings. Gold, uranium, iron ore, copper, and manganese are mined in smaller quantities. The country's waterfalls are sources of hydroelectric power, and dams located on the Mbali River northwest of Bangui produce about 4/5 of the country's electricity. Though encouraged by multilateral aid agencies to increase its exports, the Central African Republic has also been under pressure to protect its natural resources. Both timber harvesting and diamond mining occur in locations that are also centers of high biodiversity. Conflicts erupted in the 1990s between various state agencies, multinational logging companies, artisanal diamond miners, international conservation organizations, and Central African villagers seeking employment with logging companies over how best to both protect these resources and boost exports. In comparison with neighboring Cameroon, the Central African Republic's manufacturing sector, sawmills, breweries, and textile factories, is small. It is also concentrated almost entirely in or near Bangui. Despite the country's wealth of water resources, it still needs petroleum imports to produce energy. Many sizable firms suffered losses from the looting and destruction that occurred in the late 1990s, others have been inefficient or ceased operation. The Central African Republic is a member of Financial Cooperation in Central Africa, Coopération Financière en Afrique Centrale, CFA, and also an active member of the Central African Economic and Monetary Union, Communauté économique et monétaire de l'Afrique centrale, CEMAC. The country's central bank, Banque d'État de l'Afrique centrale, issues the CFA franc. There are several commercial banks that are partially French-owned. The Central African Republic relies heavily on its exports, of which the most important are timber, diamonds, cotton, and coffee. Belgium is the country's leading trading partner, buying most of the diamond exports. France is also an important partner, purchasing most of the coffee and tobacco produced. China, Germany, and Saudi Arabia are other significant trading partners. Imports include foodstuffs, chemicals, machinery, and transport equipment, and petroleum. The 1994 devaluation of the CFA franc has made it extremely difficult for Central Africans to afford many crucial imported goods, including medicine and diesel fuel. Violence and civil unrest in the late 1990s and an inadequate transport system within the country have hindered tourism, exacerbated by the limited capacity and poor service of Bangui's hotels. Some exclusive tours to big game reserves in the far north are under foreign management. Passing trans-African expeditions are the only other major activity in the tourist sector. The government of the Central African Republic officially recognizes 5 trade unions. The budget consists largely of revenue from taxes on income, profits, goods, and services and from import duties and taxes. Transportation and telecommunications. With no direct access to the sea, no railways, and only about 400 miles, 600 kilometers, of paved roads, moving products and people is exceedingly difficult. Some commerce travels along unpaved roads, but the country relies on waterways, the Ubangi and other rivers, for communication and commerce. About 5/7 of the international trade is shipped by river. There are about 4,400 miles, 7,000 kilometers, of inland waterways, though only some 2/5 of these are navigable. The Ubangi, Middle Congo route is the normal international transportation link with the outside world. This course is navigable most of the year from Bangui to Brazzaville, Congo, and from there goods are shipped by rail to Congo's Atlantic port of Pointe-Noire. The only international airport is at Bangui-Mpoko. There are several regional airports and many other airstrips, although internal services are irregular, depending on an unreliable supply of aviation fuel. A private telecommunications company now runs a domestic internet and email service. Few Central Africans have home access to such services, but many urban dwellers obtain limited access at cyber cafes. The Central African Republic maintains a small military, which includes army, air force, and paramilitary forces. French troops were withdrawn from the country in 1997 and were replaced by contingents sent by the United Nations Mission in the Central African Republic, Mission des Nations Unies en République Centrafricaine, MINURCA. MINUSCA troops remained in the country from April 1998 until February 2000. Since then, other multinational peacekeeping troops have served in the country. After a rebellion and the dissolution of the elected government in 2013, the ensuing instability heightened the need for peacekeeping troops in the country. In late 2013, France sent a peacekeeping force, Operation Sango, and the United Nations, UN, authorized the African-led International Support Mission to the Central African Republic, Mission Internationale de Soutien à la Centrafrique sous conduite africaine, MISCSA. In April 2014, the European Union, EU, also sent a small contingent of peacekeeping troops. They remained in the country for about a year. A new operation, the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in the Central African Republic, Mission Multidimensionelle Intégrée des Nations Unies pour la Stabilisation en République Centrafricaine, MINUSCA, subsumed MISCSA and previous UN missions. It became operational in September 2014. Operation Sango ended its mission and left the country in 2016. In 2017, as insecurity continued to plague the country, the UN extended MINUSCA's mandate and authorized an increase in the mission's troop levels. It is rich in diamonds, gold, oil, and uranium, but has one of the world's poorest populations. It was plunged into turmoil in 2013 when Muslim rebels from the Seleka umbrella group seized power. A band of mostly Christian militias, called the Anti-Balaka, rose up to counter the Seleka. Seleka handed power to a transitional government in 2014 under international pressure, but the country remains in turmoil. Critics say President Touadéra's government is supported by Russian Wagner Group mercenaries and Rwandan forces in its fight against rebel groups, in exchange for exploiting car resources. Some key dates in the history of the Central African Republic. 1880s, France annexes the area, partitions it among commercial concessionaires. 1894, France sets up a dependency in the area called Ubangi-Shari and partitions it among commercial concessionaires. 1910, Ubangi-Shari becomes part of the Federation of French Equatorial Africa. 1920-30, indigenous Africans stage violent protests against abuses by concessionaires. 1946, the territory is given its own assembly and representation in the French Parliament. Barthélemy Boganda, founder of the pro-independence social evolution movement of Black Africa, becomes the first Central African to be elected to the French Parliament. 1958, the territory achieves self-government within French Equatorial Africa with Boganda as Prime Minister. 1959, Boganda dies. 1960, the Central African Republic becomes independent with David Dacko as president. He turns it into a one-party state. 1965, Dacko ousted by the army commander, Jean-Bedel Bokassa, as the country faces bankruptcy and a threatened nationwide strike. 1972, Bokassa declares himself president for life. 1976, Bokassa proclaims himself emperor and renames the country the Central African Empire. 1979, Bokassa ousted in a coup led by David Dacko and backed by French troops after widespread protests in which many school children were arrested and massacred while in detention. 1993, Ange Félix Patassi wins presidential elections, ending 12 years of military rule. 2003, rebel leader and former army commander François Bozizé seizes power. 2012, new Seleka rebel coalition rapidly overruns north and center of country, and eventually the capital. 2013, Seleka rebels overrun the capital and seize power in a coup. President Bozizé flees. With turmoil continuing in the country and rival Muslim and Christian fighters accused of killing hundreds, France steps up its deployment of troops in a bid to disarm the militias. 2014, UN Security Council authorizes a peacekeeping force of 12,000 troops. UN takes over and augments African Union peacekeeping mission, renamed MINUSCA. 2015, referendum on constitutional changes lead to presidential election. 2017, Uganda withdraws its forces from Kar, where it has been fighting the Lord's Resistance Army for 5 years. 2020, President Touadéra wins re-election. But with large parts of the Kar controlled by armed groups, the election cannot be carried out in many areas. Thank you for watching this video.